on the Wheelhouse. The average age of Congress members has never been higher. Today we ask, in politics, is age really just a number? This is the Wheelhouse, the show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse. More members of Congress are over the age of 70 than ever before, and Connecticut is no exception. Most of the state's congressional delegation is in their 70s or older. And with the 2026 races already taking shape, age is becoming a key part of the conversation. This hour, we'll take a closer look at the politics of aging and what it could mean for Connecticut's next election cycle. And later, investigative reporters from the Connecticut Mirror recently found evidence of lead in more than 8,000 water service lines across the state. Stay tuned to find out if your town could be affected. Joining me now, Colin McEnroe, host of the Colin McEnroe Show at Connecticut Public. Colin, thank you for coming back. Wheelhouse host emeritus.
Yeah, I had to be wheeled in this time to the Wheelhouse, but yes, I'm happy to be back.
Yes, the show is rife with ageism.
Yeah, exactly.
Dan Haar, senior editor and columnist for Hearst Connecticut Media. Dan, thank you so much for joining the Wheelhouse.
Thank you. Great to be here. Almost a septuagenarian.
He's old. Yeah, he's older. He's older than he looks.
Also on the show, Akhil Reed Amar. He is at Yale University, the Sterling Professor of Law and Political Science. Thank you so much for joining us on the Wheelhouse. Such a pleasure to have you back.
Thanks. Age 66.
Age 66. That means that Akhil was born in 1958.
So was I.
I'm so appreciative of having you all on the show. We're not going to comment on your age too much more after that, but listeners, let us know. Listeners, let us know. You guys all look great. You guys are all in far better shape than I am, and I am 20 years about your junior. So, Congressman Larson, he represents Connecticut's 1st Congressional District. I just want to tell folks, you can give us a call if you want to talk about Congressman Larson, you want to talk about a politician's age and how it impacts your vote. 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. Congressman Larson, he represents Connecticut's 1st Congressional District. He's had that seat since 1999. Next year, he'll be up for re-election. Is he running for a 15th term, Dan Haar?
30. He is running, absolutely. 30 years is a nice round number. The issue with John Larson is not necessarily just his age. It's the attack on him that he's been there too long and that he's been in elected office from central Connecticut for too long. That's the attack. That's not necessarily what I believe. He has been elected since 1977 with a 4-year hiatus when he was after he lost for governor.
You're saying that it's going to be his toughest race yet. You just recently had a column. Why does this election feel different from previous races to you?
Well, the difference here is that this, for the first time, is when you have your so-called dream matchup, right? In every district, there is a person that you can say, if the incumbent were to be challenged by someone who's the next presumed winner, holder of that seat, right? That would be, you would call that a dream matchup. Luke Bronin, regardless of whether he's running or not now, is one of the 2 or 3 or 4 people who was talked about as the next person to hold this seat. Such a person rarely is a challenger to a longtime incumbent. That's the big difference here.
3 septuagenarians and an octogenarian among Connecticut.
Walk into a bar.
They walk into a bar. What do they order, Colin McEnroe?
Milk of magnesia.
Do you anticipate that the age is going to be a bigger issue this election cycle here?
Well, I mean, let's say that to a certain degree, recent history, Joe Biden, Mitch McConnell, Dianne Feinstein, these particular performances, if that's the right word, put the age issue, I think, in a higher state of relief so that it is maybe something that you can talk about. I would agree, which I rarely do with Dan, that it's really not the age. It might be the time of service. It might be one particular kind of medical concern with John. I'm not sure how the voters process this. I will quickly say, the old polling saw is that people tend to hate Congress but love their congressperson, and I think that's probably very true with John, that people who are very disenchanted with certain things going on in Washington are not necessarily disenchanted with John Larson.
You made a comment in your column, Dan, that both of these gentlemen just recently wrote a column in Hearst Connecticut Media, ctinsider.com. You could find both of those columns at ctinsider.com. But in your column, you're saying that Rosa doesn't necessarily have the same kind of comments about her age as Larson does, or the same kind of concern.
She's the oldest of the four being Congressman Joe Courtney, Governor Ned Lamont, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, and, of course, John Larson. She's the oldest at age 82. She does not seem to be slowing in any way. The last time I was on the phone with her, I didn't notice any slowdown of either thought or anything else. Not that I do with Congressman Larson, but with Rosa DeLauro and with Joe Courtney and with Ned Lamont, they are all at the peak of their powers. Larson is not. And that's a big factor and something to consider in this race. He was at the peak of his power between 2009 and 2013 when he was chairman of the Democratic caucus. Not to say that he doesn't have power now. He's a chairman of a subcommittee.
Well, although presumably, I just a second, and then I want to hear what Akhil has to say. But presumably, if the House were to flip blue, which is not necessarily, a lock, Larson would have a lot of power. In other words, his stock would go way up just due to seniority and committee positions and stuff like that. A win would make Larson powerful in a way that Luke Bronin and Gillian Gilchrist, to jump ahead, are unlikely to be able to attain in their rookie seasons.
Akhil, let's explore the idea of people at least saying that politicians, if they're older, are out of touch by younger folks. Has that argument always been part of the political landscape? Is this kind of new?
It has always been part. Since I outed myself on my age, when I'm a kid, I'm listening to on records to John Kennedy's inaugural address, "Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike." The torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century. He's reminding folks that there's old guy, an old way of thinking, born in the last century, Dwight Eisenhower, and he's a new generation. And then this is Gary Hart's theme in 1984. He doesn't win the nomination, but he would have been the best horse for the Democrats to have run against an elderly Ronald Reagan. And Bill Clinton picks up very much on Gary Hart's generational themes. In fact, running against an elderly George Herbert Walker Bush. I just given you some presidential examples, but of course you see this again and again in American politics. American politics has been generational, at least at times. And those of us who remember the 1960s remember basically the phrase generation gap and remember actually the buttons. Don't trust anyone over 30. Ouch.
Hey. Go ahead,
I didn't notice the greatest generation ceding power very easily. That is probably, and Professor, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the only generation that ever had 7 presidents, starting with Kennedy.
Well, and part of this is a function of medical technology, geriatric medicine improvements, the conditional life expectancy of someone who makes it to age 60. We're not just talking about, infant mortality and all the rest, but if you make it to age 60, you got a pretty good shot of making it to 70. And if you make it to 70, you have a pretty good shot of making it to 80. And the longer you live, the longer you live.
And I think politicians wear their age differently, too. And Reagan, who really, it turned out, was having significant cognitive issues in his second term. I mean, he famously had the line with Mondale where he said, I refused to make my opponent's youth and inexperience an issue. It got a big laugh. But I mean, he really had a problem, but he didn't wear it. He seemed, once again, like this very folksy, comfortable in his own skin ex-actor turned politician.
Let's see if we can get some callers here. We want to hear whether a politician's age matters to you and your vote. Give us a call, 888-720-9677. I cut you off, Akhil. Come back in.
Oh, and the Democrats didn't run their best candidate to showcase that issue, who would have been Gary Hart, a very young, vigorous Gary Hart, rather than Walter Mondale. And of course, some of our audience may remember the visual of Gary Hart throwing an axe and actually, and it sticks, in a huge a tree, and that was, saying like, I'm the next generation, and we ran. Actually, I'm a Democrat, an older warhorse, Walter Mondale, and that didn't. Because politics is often, yes, you were talking about dream matchups and things like that. Politics is often, a paired competition between two people. Maybe Rocky Balboa wasn't the best, boxer of all time, but because he was a southpaw, he had certain advantages against Apollo Creed or something like that. It's these one-on-one matchups.
That's why we have Akhil on the show right there.
Well,
because
I
you
do
brought
want
up
to say,
Apollo.
Akhil, I'm not sure anybody remembers the axe thing except you. I think what people remember is Donna Rice sitting on
That's
Gary's
exactly
lap
right.
on a boat called Monkey Business.
That was later.
But that could, I mean,
election
stuff like that could have easily come out, in that campaign too. So I'm not sure Hart was necessarily the perfect answer.
Lawmakers.
But he was making a generational appeal because he had been influenced by Jack Kennedy before him. And that's the appeal that Bill Clinton very much actually borrows. So you see this from Kennedy to Hart to Clinton and the openly generational arguments.
I believe that Jack Kennedy was 45 years old when he was elected president. Lawmakers under 45 years old used to be better represented in Congress. I think it's the New York Times that has in there that in 1981, 37% of the House and Senate members were younger than 45. Akhil, today it's only 16%. Do we make anything about those numbers?
Oh, it's hard to, historians may actually have a better sense than those of us living through it, but it has been an age of unique polarization. And in an era of polarization, maybe each party is reluctant to actually give up what seems like the better bet, which is let's go for the incumbent. We're going to have seniority. Colin put his finger on it. People hate Congress, but like their congressperson. And one reason that they do, he also put his finger on it, is if you swap out your incumbent for a rookie, you have less seniority and maybe less clout for your district, less pork and other things. So it's a bit of a prisoner's dilemma game. If you a person steps down, maybe the party has a slightly less good chance of winning because now it's an open seat rather than a seat with an incumbent with all the advantages of incumbency, including seniority and name recognition. And people are living longer. And maybe this generation, the generation slightly above mine, maybe it's just it clings to power too much. A whole bunch of possible explanations.
At some point, the seniority cycle has to turn over. Luke Bronin's whole point is this is precisely the time because John Larson's major program initiative, Social Security reform, has zero chance of happening in the next 2 years anyway. And so, yes, to Colin's point, Larson would have more seniority, but at some point that has to happen, and that's the point is when does it happen?
And I think we're seeing a generational pipeline jam here. I said in my column, the baby boomers won't leave, and now the millennials are getting very impatient, and so you have politicians like Luke Bronin and William Tong who are Gen Xers who haven't really necessarily had the chance to do the kinds of things they want to do, but they're already feeling the hot breath of the millennials on their back, and they can't get the baby boomers to leave.
Same as housing.
I think in kind of sort of private conversations, maybe earlier than people anticipated, Bronin announcing in the summer that he's going to run the race. So, like you said, these millennials are kind of getting it into it as much as possible. Although I think Bronin's a Gen Xer.
He's a Gen Xer. He's the guy stuck in the middle.
Just really quickly, we do have a phone call, and it comes from Eiley in Wallingford. Eiley, good morning. Welcome to the Wheelhouse.
Good morning.
Can I hear what you got to say this morning? Go ahead.
So, yeah, I can go on. But I'm in Rose's district, and I know I appreciate the work she does. And there's so many of our delegation that is elder, and I have concerns about their health as they age and age-related issues and them not being able to serve. As Colin mentioned, Dianne Feinstein, she missed a whole bunch of important votes because she was on her deathbed for months. And it's not just that, though. It's like when you ask Rosa about term limits, for instance, she'll say, well, it can take a really long time to earn everybody's trust. It can take a decade or longer to earn the trust of your colleagues. Well, if you knew you only had 12 years in office, I don't think it would take 10 to start trusting your colleagues. And then, well, does that mean that the older people shut out the younger? Does it, if they're dealing with, new freshman, sophomore Congress people, are they like, you haven't put in your time yet? We're just not going to let you, get your agenda up in front of people?
Eiley, I appreciate you calling in, and now I'm going to direct your question towards Dan and Colin. I'm going to say this. Thank you so much for calling in this morning, Eiley. I'm going to say that there's concerns about age, and then maybe there's concerns about people not leaving by the time they have their health concerns. Is that what I'm getting from what Eiley just said?
There are a couple of overlay issues here. The first is that we, and I'm not accusing Eiley of doing this, but we can't confuse the worst case with the typical case.
With Feinstein, much
Feinstein
different
is the worst
situation than
case.
Rosa
John
or
Larson,
even John.
John
Yes.
Larson's medical issue, which we haven't really talked about back in February or March, I believe it was February, where he had a combination of a heart issue stemming from an old valve replacement and a medical, mixing of medication issue. And he momentarily stopped talking for 30 seconds, right? That is something that could have happened to any of us, right? Yes, it could.
You said it.
Right? And so he's generally still hale and energetic. And if we can believe him that medical issue was not indicative of aging, then that's separate from the Dianne Feinstein. And I think we should keep that distinction.
Yeah, but I think I totally agree, by the way, and I don't think John has any cognitive impairment at all. I don't think that's the problem. But these things play differently. After the debate last year, these questions, we went through...
and Mitch McConnell getting picked on.
Yeah, and McConnell too. But we went through about 18 months of people arguing about whether Biden was too old or whether he was having cognitive problems. And we now know the story from the Jake Tapper books and the other books. He was having cognitive problems. They were covered up, and then they all came pouring out in the worst possible venue, a presidential debate. And I don't think John has anything like those problems, but people don't necessarily keep the categories straight the way that Danny understandably thinks that they should. And so I think now an age question and a medical question, it just presents a little bit differently in a way that might be very unfair to John Larson.
I want Akhil to weigh in a second on some of these politicians too, because there seems to be a mark of delineation where some are getting the scrutiny and some aren't. Ann Bonnie from our friend Ann from Vernon is going to tell us that maybe one of the congressional members out of Connecticut is escaping some of this. What do you have to say about this, Ann? Go ahead.
Well, I love our legislators. I think they're wonderful, and they've worked their way up to very powerful positions. But I did wonder how Richard Blumenthal escaped this morning's discussion.
Well, first of all, he's about 40% Android, so that part won't age. It won't be a big problem. Look, Dick is up in years, but he hasn't really shown any signs that I'm aware of being the indefatigable campaigner and senator that he typically has been. And, to get back to our original point.
Again, I'm 40 years younger than Dick Blumenthal, and I don't go to 7 Memorial Day parades like he does.
Yeah, no, he's got a lot of energy.
He's also 4 years from running, and if he decides to run again, you can be assured.
That'll be a conversation.
And from Vernon, you can be a certainty that we'll be
and
talking
you're going to be in
his age.
Dan Haar's column in 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead, Akhil.
Eiley mentioned another issue. So let's distinguish between two different issues. The voters making a decision, race by race, candidate by candidate, person by person, that this person maybe, seems out of it or has been there too long or whatever, and that person hasn't. And maybe the person who hasn't is technically older but more vigorous or has been there less often or is still doing a great job or whatever. That's up to each voter to decide for herself. Eiley also mentioned term limits. Now that's, and one argument for term limits is the game is kind of rigged because people want to send their incumbent back for more pork and seniority. The counter is we have term limits. They're called elections. And you can decide actually whether this person's been there too long and that person hasn't constitutionally, because I'm a constitutional scholar. And I just want to remind our audience that the Supreme Court has ruled that if you want to have term limits for Congress, that's going to require a constitutional amendment. Connecticut couldn't on its own say we're going to have term limits for the Connecticut delegation.
Can I just say one thing about this, Akhil? I would just modify your statement a little bit. We have term limits. They're called primaries. I think increasingly getting an incumbent out in a general election is a big lift these days, and these districts, including the first congressional district, are gerrymandered.
We're going to save the
term
term limit conversation for the next segment because I got to go to break. But before I do, I got to have Dan jump back in just because I want to know what John Larson is thinking about this really quickly. There was a comment that Bronin made about something like 28 years being too long. I know that that's not exactly the time served here so far by John Larson, but how did that land with him? Just to help us get an understanding of how John Larson's feeling.
He feels insulted. basically. He feels, I've done all this, I haven't let you down. And don't forget, in these districts where you have a submarine or a jet engine district, getting money for those things is a really, really big deal. I would argue more than, for me personally, as a voter, half the job, right? No kidding. And so he does that part very well. He is insulted. That's his general reaction.
Also in the running for Larson's seat, Hartford teacher Ruth Fortune, Southington Council member Jack Perry, Democratic State Representative Jillian Gilchrist says she's considering a run, and Republican Amy Chai has declared her candidacy. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is The Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. After the break, we're going to talk about term limits. This is The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. When it comes to politics and who we elect, is age really just a number? This hour, we're looking at how a politician's age can shape public perception and influence voters. Still with me, Dan Haar, senior editor and columnist for Hearst, Connecticut Media. Akhil Reed Amar, Sterling Professor of Law and Political Science at Yale University. And Colin McEnroe, host of the Colin McEnroe Show at Connecticut Public. We got to hear from you guys. Give us a call. Does a politician's age impact the way you vote? 888-720-9677. Aha, 888-720-9677. Akhil, let's start with Congress. Term limits exist for the president. 2 terms, no exceptions, we think. But not for senators or representatives. Why is that? What's the thinking behind it?
Well, there was it required a constitutional amendment to term limit presidents, because the founders didn't do that. And that amendment came about in part because there were particular concerns about a president, one person, he has so much power, one day she, and concerns about kind of monarchy, and maybe a president actually might precipitate all sorts of crises to make themselves indispensable, and then you have to actually keep voting him in. So this was very much a concern. In particular, the Constitution was amended after Franklin Roosevelt, won 4 times, and he ran for an unprecedented 3rd consecutive term in the middle of a world war. And the concern was, well, you don't want to switch horses in the middle of the stream in a war. But you look around the world and you saw Stalin and you saw Hitler and you saw Mussolini, and Americans worried, especially about how an incumbent could entrench himself. And that was a bigger concern for the presidency, one person, than it was for senators. There, now 100 of them. Back then it was maybe 96, 435 House members. And it required a constitutional amendment. And it will require a constitutional amendment to term limit members of the House or Senate if the American people, think that's what they want.
Have we seen a real effort for that to take place, a constitutional amendment to make sure that there are term limits for U.S. representatives and U.S. senators?
We saw movements state by state doing this, and actually the Supreme Court smacked it down in a case called Term Limits versus Thornton, and said, no, you can't, individual states can't do this. It's going to require a constitutional amendment to do this. I actually was cited in one of the dissenting opinions in that case. What could have happened is if individual states had done it, and which the Supreme Court didn't allow, and momentum had built up, then there might have been pressure to amend the Constitution, because at a certain point, states who do this are going to say, hey, we're chumps. We're actually we're denying ourselves some of the benefits of seniority when we're term limiting our delegation. We're not getting as much money for our submarines or dams or forts or roads or something, and other states aren't. So if states had been able to do it one by one, eventually there would be pressure to do it more generally. But now there's not going to be, because one other thing about constitutional amendment, doesn't require the president's agreement, okay? But it requires 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, 3/4 of the states. Our existing House members can vote to term limit themselves in an amendment, or existing senators. Now, you might have had that if they were term limited anyway under state law, but the Supreme Court said, no, states can't do this. So that's going to actually make it harder to have a constitutional amendment for this.
We want to hear from our listeners. Give us a call, 888-720-9677. I'm doing that because we're going to get a call right now Catherine from Middletown. Go ahead. Thank you for calling back, Catherine. We appreciate it.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. Go ahead, Catherine.
Well, I have a couple questions. The first is about demographics.
Okay.
Are there just more baby boomers, and therefore they're swaying the elections? But also, I strongly agree in term limits. And I work in manufacturing. We have 70 and 80-year-olds in the plants. Some of them are very valuable because of their knowledge, tribal knowledge, but some should have retired 10 years ago. It's not about age, it's about ability. And
go ahead with your second question.
Well, the first was about demographics.
Sure.
Are the boomers just a bigger bulk? My second point is I'm all for term limits, not age limits. People can be valuable at any age. Why aren't they mentoring? They should be introducing younger politicians to their donors if they really cared about the public they're serving.
Catherine, thank you so much for your call today. I'm going to pass your points on here to Dan Haar and Colin McEnroe. That reminds me of that line from Dumb and Dumber. Old people, while slow
I thought you were referring to us.
Can really still serve a purpose.
Well, the millennials have passed baby boomers in number of voters, not probably close and probably not in Connecticut. But I think overall, I could be wrong about that. In any case, they are mentoring, and that's one of the problems, is that there's an insidious problem of insiderism that voters and political outsiders don't like. And that's sometimes you don't like to see that.
That's your new column, the insidious insiderism. I have to get all my Insider.
But that's a form. That's a form of mentoring. That's not necessarily the kind that the caller had in mind. The other, I just want to quickly say, we're not going to get term limits. The thing that we can get is campaign finance reform to lower the likelihood of an automatic election for an incumbent.
Akhil, you heard that caller. She made her 2 points. Do you have any thoughts on that, or what Dan just said about campaign finance reform?
Yeah, she distinguished between age limits and term limits. We could think about another branch of government. We've mentioned actually the executive branch and Joe Biden and 2 terms for the presidency. And obviously we're talking about House members and Senate members who are legislators. The judiciary, there's this debate, and some states, for state judges, have age limits. You have to leave at age 70 or 75 or 80. Other states actually do it by, in effect, years, 15 years, 18 years and out. Now, again, for federal judges, we don't have that. One question is, could you get a kind of term limits idea for federal judges without a constitutional amendment? I actually put forth a plan that's a kind of workaround, 18 years for Supreme Court justices, and it's not an age limit. It's a term limit. And the other point is, for those who don't like this, they say, well, you're free as a voter to vote against someone that you otherwise like because you think they've served too many terms, or you think they're too old, and that may vary from person to person. So the argument against formal term limits is let the voters decide. Why take that option away from the voters? And the counter argument is the game is somewhat rigged in favor of incumbents, which connects to campaign finance reform and other stuff.
So this is what we should say. I'm a little uncomfortable with how much time we're spending on age and term limits and stuff like that. I acknowledge totally that since 1971, what's that, 54 years, there have been 3 members of Congress in the 1st District. So it's Bill Cotter, Barbara Kennelly, and now John Larson. That's it from 1971 to the present. So yes, I mean, this is a very safe seat once you get it, unless you make a really bad decision. But I don't think that that's what this primary is going to be about. I'm sure John Larson's age and time in office will be on the table as issues. But I don't think Mamdani won in New York because he's younger than Andrew Cuomo. He won in New York City because he had more interesting ideas and he excited people in a way that other politicians weren't. And to me, the politician in this primary who captures the imaginations of people and who persuades people that he or she is capable of delivering on some of their needs and wants, that's who's going to win. And it's going to matter a lot less who the incumbent is. That's what we're talking about right now. But in the thick of the primary, hopefully, and I think realistically, this is going to be a campaign about ideas and issues and who's got the better ones.
I appreciate that very much, that perspective, Colin.
And in the New York mayoralty thing, since we're talking about presidents and even governors and House and Senate members and judges and everything, now we're bringing in mayors. On the New York mayoralty, it ain't over till it's over, because actually Colin is right. Primaries are hugely important, but even in New York, they may not be decisive. We'll just have to see.
I think it was very important, though, to still do this show, because I think that John Larson's age and health, probably more health, are a reason why this race may be as close as possible. And that's why we want to talk about it. Maybe it's not necessarily anything that John Larson's doing. It may be something that's heaped on him because of one medical episode. And that's why I wanted to.
Well, what I think also is worth talking about is imagine a scenario where Jillian Gilchrist gets into the race. Now, she's really young. She's a millennial. Luke is a Gen Xer.
She's only 3 years younger than Bronin.
I know, but she's technically
really
a millennial. Luke's technically
She was born
a
in
Gen
the
Xer,
1980s.
And Larson's a baby boomer.
I got to jump in because we're getting a call from James. Go ahead, James, because we want to make sure. And sorry, James, I might be quick with you here. I've been doing that with Catherine and some of our other callers because we're almost running out of time in our segment. Go ahead, James.
No worries. So I was just calling because I'm looking at things from a different perspective. A lot of people are saying, why do we have these older folks in Congress? Well, I'm also a little bit concerned about having younger folks in Congress in the sense that, I come from the 2nd District. Joe Courtney, chair or ranking member of the Naval Power Subcommittee, having a new guy come in there really shakes up the dynamic for Eastern Connecticut, where we don't necessarily have someone who can take care of the sub base for us.
Thank you,
and
James.
In the state,
Joe Courtney, Joe, this is a great point because Joe Courtney, 71 years old, but nobody might know more about policy than Joe Courtney.
Republican Rob Simmons did the one thing he had to do in 2006 and saved the submarine base. It was an unbelievable bipartisan effort that he led, and he still lost to Joe Courtney in 2008.
When James says that he's from the 2nd District, he's calling in from Waterford. I wanted to make that point. Go ahead, Colin.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be a mistake. I mean, I understand how important the sub base is and all that kind of stuff, but as Danny, I think, is suggesting, the 2nd District is a very big district that stretches all the way up to the northern border, I believe.
Yeah,
it's up to Enfield and stuff like that. Where
I'm in Glastonbury, and I'm in the 2nd
Guess
District.
what? They don't care about submarines in Enfield. If it can't get up the Connecticut River, they don't care about it. So, I mean, the idea that that's Joe's only job, I think is a misprision.
How do you know they're not coming up the Connecticut River?
Well, they might be.
Hey, we only got a couple minutes left in the segment, so let's start talking a little bit about the race, just a little bit, because I know you guys have thoughts on Gilchrist, Bronin, Larson. Say the public hypothetically turns out to vote for Larson, maybe even Rosa DeLauro. Would the public benefit, particularly in a time when federal programs are being cut, from swapping out some of these longtime Democratic voices for newer ones, just for the sake of having some younger cats in office?
Well, age in and of itself, as we've discussed, is not the thing. But in this case, we have an interesting race because Bronin ideologically is very, very close to Larson. And to Colin's point,
Are they, though?
I would argue that Larson is to the left of Bronin.
I would say that.
I mean, it's hard to know.
there aren't that many opportunities to actuate that.
Yeah.
We had,
We will
as
find
you
out.
pointed out in your column, the 2003 war vote was one.
Yeah. Just for people who didn't read that column, John Larson voted against the invasion of Iraq. Not that many Democrats did. In fact, there are certain Democrats from Connecticut who voted in favor of it. Now, one reason John could do that, one reason is he is a pretty courageous guy. He's pretty fearless. But he's also got a very safe seat. I mean, he wasn't going to lose the next election because he voted against invading Iraq.
You are talking about money and helping us follow it, Colin. Jillian Gilchrist on the periphery of this race because she's not in it yet. And we've talked to her about it, but she's not in yet. Do you think that she can raise the kind of money it takes to be a player?
First of all, nobody really knows that. But if Gilchrist were to get in and do this, she would probably kind of be a little bit more Bernie. She'd be raising money in smaller amounts. She'd tap into, in particular, Indivisible, which is increasingly a pretty potent movement in Connecticut. The people who belong to Indivisible are, I could be challenged on this, but I think they're looking around for new leadership. I think everybody understands now that these grassroots groups that grew up, particularly out of dissatisfaction with Trump, are now very important. They're the people they're the groups that get people out to big rallies, to No Kings rallies and stuff like that. So you've got to talk to them. John Larson wants to talk to them. But I mean, if Gilchrist ran, I think she would not have big donors. She would be raising, and that's good because you're raising money on enthusiasm. Somebody gives you $100, and that person is probably pretty likely to come out and vote for you because they gave you $100.
Bronin says he has $500,000. I haven't seen it in the campaign finance numbers. Jack Perry says he's got $500,000 of his own money. What do you guys want to make of the cash situation? John Larson, I saw on the data, $266,000 cash on hand.
John,
money matters.
Sure, he'll make more.
Money matters in congressional districts to a point. When you have a threshold minimum of $500,000 or $600,000 or $700,000, it obviously takes millions. But when you have a threshold minimum to get your voice out, and when there's so-called earned media, you have much of it flattens the picture a little bit.
But the other thing is, we haven't had a primary since 1998, a real primary in that district. We don't know how much money it takes. We don't know how many people are going to come out to vote. We don't know how much you have to staff up. This is all, very much terra incognita.
So many callers today. We want to make sure that you call us for the next segment as well. Ed in Middletown says that he doesn't necessarily think it's age that's the question here. He thinks it's Dems' inability to fight Republicans. So that's Ed's thought. Thank you for that, Ed. I appreciate that. Thank you to all of our callers from Connecticut Public Radio. This is the Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. We ran out of time, Dan Haar.
That's a great point that Luke Bronin is making, by the way. That's a big part of his message.
That's right. He's saying that we're in crisis.
Bringing that message against the Republicans.
He's senior editor and columnist for Hearst Connecticut Media. Dan,
editor?
Always great to have you on the show.
Great to be here.
Colin McEnroe. He's the Wheelhouse host emeritus.
The senior host of the Wheelhouse.
He is the senior host of the Wheelhouse. Not
Senior
because of age,
emeritus.
but
Or
because
the senior host of the Colin
experience.
McEnroe show.
And he's the senior host of the Colin McEnroe Show, and he's just an all-around great guy. Thank you so much for coming on our program.
Thank you.
You've also been listening to Akhil Reed Amar. You heard him say that he was cited in an opinion. This is one of America's foremost legal constitutional scholars. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And the book is called Born Equal, Remaking America's Constitution, 1840 to 1920. It comes out next month. It's available for pre-order.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. That's it for this segment. Stick with us and ask our lead experts your questions. That's L-E-A-D, lead. 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. Connecticut Mirror reporters recently published a months-long investigation into Connecticut's water service lines. They found that thousands of residents may still be drinking from lead pipes, many without even knowing it. Here to tell me more about their findings, Andrew Brown, investigative reporter with the Connecticut Mirror.
Good morning.
Good morning, Andrew. And Jenna Carlesso. So glad to talk to Jenna again. It's been a while. Thank you for joining us, Jenna.
Thanks for having us.
She's also an investigative reporter with the Connecticut Mirror. If you have any questions about your water, do give us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. Andrew, you and your colleagues, you and Jenna have been investigating water pipes for months now. Can you walk us into your investigation, walk us through it, and some of your major findings?
Sure. So we approached this story because the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency put out a new regulation last year that is requiring every public water system in the country to start identifying what are known as lead service lines. These are the lines that run from the water mains under the street to people's homes and apartments and even schools. And we set about doing this work because for the first time, in more than a century, the EPA required these water utilities to find all of their lead lines, start to identify them, and they set a deadline within the next 10 years to replace all of those. So we decided to look at the data that these water utilities were creating in trying to find these lead water lines, and we got that from the State Department of Public Health, which regulates drinking water. And what we found was that there are nearly 8,000 suspected lead service lines still in use throughout the state, though that number can change as the utilities continue to try to investigate this issue. And what it showed is that many of them are located in places you may actually think they would exist, which are older cities, places with old water systems. Think Bridgeport, Waterbury, Willimantic, New London, and interestingly, we also found it in Greenwich, which is a suburb, but does have an older water system in the state.
Jenna, I want to talk about the health risks I know you have an extensive background in health reporting. That's why I'm really happy to ask this question. Is there any amount of lead that's considered safe for the human body?
No, there's no amount. It's not like zinc or some other mineral where it's okay, even expected to have it. There's no safe amount. And you can see it when it shows up. I mean, in terms of symptoms is when you might see it or when it comes up on a blood test. So
how long does it take for the symptoms to show up?
It depends on the level of lead, I think, in your body. For kids, you're looking at maybe developmental delays, learning difficulties, loss of appetite, weight loss. In adults, you're looking at maybe high blood pressure, joint and muscle pain, difficulties with memory or concentration, headache, that kind of thing.
Thank you for outlining that. That's very important because people may be in a Bridgeport, a Waterbury, and they might be in a Greenwich, and they might not know that this is happening. How do I know that? You all knocked on doors, I understand. Do you want to talk about that effort, Andrew?
Yeah, so Jenna, and I don't want to go without recognizing our colleagues Sharzad and Renata, who obviously brought the bilingual aspect to knocking on these doors in cities that have a large Hispanic population. So the four of us set out earlier this year, first visiting Waterbury and then going to Bridgeport, Greenwich, Willimantic, Middletown, trying to understand, one, whether people were alerted at these addresses with suspected lead lines that the utilities had suspected a lead line there. And what we found is that some people knew. Some people had a home inspector, whenever they bought their home, note that the line coming into their basement was made of lead. But there were a lot of people in places like Bridgeport and Waterbury who were renters who just didn't know. They didn't have any indication that they were potentially consuming water from a suspected lead service line. And that could be for a variety of reasons, including maybe their landlord pays the utility bill or whatever else, or they're just not paying attention to the mailers showing up. So, yeah, we encountered a lot of that.
Jenna, can you tell me about one interaction you might have had? Is there something that was really intriguing to you while you all were knocking on doors?
Well, one thing that stood out was, I think we surprised a decent number of people who, their landlord might be getting the notice and may not be passing it along. So we would knock on a door, and a fair number of folks had no idea. On the flip side, there were other folks who were notified, but maybe didn't know what to do next. So they said, we're awaiting further instruction, but we're really confused about where we go from here.
8,000 service lines. That sounds like a lot. Can you help us understand the scope of that number? And when we're talking about that, could it be more than current estimates? You said that it's not necessarily the final number.
This is an evolving process, and it's going to continue to evolve over the next 10 years as the utilities are required to find and replace these lead lines. This is a small percentage of actually the number of water connections in the state of Connecticut. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people on a public water system in Connecticut. So while it's a small subset, for those people that have these lead lines, they're going to have these lines replaced within the next 10 years. As far as whether the data can change, many utilities are still trying to essentially decipher and figure out how many there are. And to give some context, some of the smaller municipal systems identified, 80, 90% of their lines as essentially lead status unknown. So they drew a question mark next to almost all of their service lines. So those utilities are going to be updating their data in the coming years, and some may find it, some may find none. But it really could change drastically. We could either increase by thousands of lead service lines, or in some cases, because they're making educated guesses, we could see the number come down. It really depends on how this all plays out and what utilities find when they start digging up these lines.
Jenna, you said that it might be that the landlords know and they didn't necessarily pass it on. You gave us a couple of reasons. So did Andy. Can you tell us more about why the guidance really hasn't been there on what people should do about it? It seems like the public education and the outreach on this issue? I know we hear this a lot about different agencies in Connecticut, but it seems like it's not as effective here.
The sort of range of responses we got when door knocking, reaching out to folks really highlights the importance of the communication and communicating clearly when something, what's happening, how concerned people should be, what they should do next. That piece connected, some municipalities were very good at it and other areas, water utilities, municipalities were not as good at it.
What could be done by the state here? I'll talk about the state first. Is there anything that the state could do?
I think if you would ask the State Department of Public Health, they have done a lot. They have a website for lead-free CT. They talk about the requirements of replacing these lines in the next 10 years. So they've put out guidance, but part of this is on the utilities. And I want to say from the utility perspective, they've done what is the EPA has required of them, which is sending out notices, as far as I know, making sure that people with suspected lead lines have at least received something. Part of this is also they don't want to set off a panic. And I say that because the utilities, if you talk to them, will say, we are treating essentially drinking water with what are known as corrosion inhibitors. These are compounds that they put in the drinking water before they send it into the pipes. And the point of these compounds is to make sure that a large amount of lead doesn't essentially leach into the water as it's traveling through the pipes and into your faucet.
But it's still possible that some lead can get in there?
That is what engineers and health experts have said, is that it can be sporadic. The corrosion control, as they said, cuts down on lead reaching people's faucets, but it's not 100%. And some of the utilities even say that on their website. They will note that they're using corrosion control, but it's not a given.
You mentioned the EPA. Is this something, Jenna, where we could see the federal government kind of jump in here? And Andrew, if you want to answer this question, you can. It's either one of you. Can the federal government help, or is there concern that they might not necessarily be into this, as we know that this administration may not be so environmentally conscious?
Go ahead, Jenna.
You want to take this one, Andy?
Sure. Interestingly enough, there was an update yesterday. The Associated Press reported that the Trump administration intends to essentially follow through on this new regulation that was implemented under the Biden administration. And it kind of came as a surprise to some who were following this issue, because congressional Republicans had sponsored a bill earlier this year to actually roll back the regulation. Essentially what the Trump administration has said, and this is in federal court, is that they will seek to uphold the new regulation requiring these replacements in 10 years. But they have said that essentially there may be some tweaks, or they may revise some of the guidance to make it more friendly to the utilities. It's kind of unclear what that means, though.
Jenna, as we close out here briefly, is there anything you want to say about the story and this effort that you all undertook?
I mean, we'll be continuing. We're doing a series of community events. Our next one is in Bridgeport next Wednesday. We have another one in Willimantic, and we've got some follow-up stories. We'll be testing folks' water to see if it comes back for positive with lead. So we have more to come.
And you can find those stories at ctmirror.org. Thank you so much for the work that you all did, Jenna Carlesso and Andrew Brown.
Thank you.
The Wheelhouse is produced by Chloe Wynn. Thank you so much to Patrick Scahill, Gene Amatruda, Robin, Doyen Aiken, and the rest of the team. Download The Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse. Thank you for listening.